think it would be great for us to just like start off with talking a little bit about how we got to this world of the climate, working in climate as like a career or like as a pathway, and how you've gotten to this place.
Yeah, so hi everybody. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It's great to share this virtual space and really honored to be one of the voices to help close this out after you said a long 10 days, I'm sure. Um, yeah, my full name is Jordan Marie Brings Through White Horses Daniel. I'm Koichasha Lakota, citizen of Koichasha Oyate, the Lower Brule Indian Reservation in central South Dakota. I am currently a guest and reside on Tonga lands, which is also known as Los Angeles, California. So that's where I am tuning in from. And yeah, I'm the executive director and organizer of Rising Hearts. And my journey really to what environmental justice is and all of the intersectional approaches to how we fight for environmental justice, social justice, racial justice, economic justice, began with Standing Rock. And, you know, my whole life, I never wanted to be the one behind a bullhorn or behind the mic or front and center. I wanted to be working on legislation behind the scenes, you know, really trying to create a difference, you know, systemically. Because growing up on the reservation for the first 10 years of my life and having this unique perspective of living in two worlds of my culture, my traditions, ceremonies, language, and the other culture of, you know, having to assimilate into society and being one of the only kids of color in my school for a long time until I got to high school and dealing with a lot of racism and experiencing a hate crime. You know, it gave me this neat, unique perspective of the inequality, the inequities, and the injustice happening within our communities, especially my own community. And then as I got older, I started to travel for my work. And I saw that it's not just an isolated incident for Indigenous community, for my community. It was something that I was seeing at urban communities that were Indigenous, other reservations. And then it just led to all of these pathways talking about, you know, health inequality, you know, a lot of what was missing in terms of like the injustice of substance misuse and abuse and intergenerational trauma, the boarding school eras, and just seeing how it's all interconnected and how it's rooted to colonialism. It's rooted to white supremacy and systems of oppression and racism. And even though all of our communities, we come from different nations, we speak different languages, but we all have felt the same similar impacts of colonization in a variety of ways. And as I got older, living in DC, and that's how I met, you know, Power Shift Network. That's how I met so many other, you know, environmental justice relatives within this space, is that I saw that it was very, it was much more than just my community. It was happening within the Black communities. It's happening within our brown communities. It's happening, you know, to marginalized, oppressed communities. It's happening everywhere. And it just kind of blew my mind as to the scope of this injustice and how bad it is and how we have all been impacted. And so it made me reflect on a teaching, Mitakuye Oyasin, we are all related, or all my relations, as that's the embodiment of my life of not only fighting for my own people, but fighting for everybody. And that's the way I was taught by my elders, the way I was taught by my family. And I felt like that was kind of like the indigenous concept of what intersectionality is, intersectional theory by Kimberly Crenshaw. And when I finally got into the environmental justice space, I was like, oh my gosh, there's an actual word to call this. And this is how I've been taught to live my life. And now Rising Hearts, myself, and those that I get to work with really focus on really building and cultivating community through intersectionality and really braiding everything together and seeing it is interconnected when we talk about what environmental justice is. You can't have justice without racial justice, without social justice, and we need to be incorporating all of these issues into one bigger, larger conversation of what the future of our communities, our lives, our safety, you know, the respect and visibility looks like for our next generations. And so that's how I got into this work, hearing the call from Standing Rock, and it forced me to push myself outside of my own comfort zone of saying, Jordan, you have all of these youth here who ran 2,000 miles to stand for something. You need to do more. And, I had to have that conversation with myself and saying, you're going to be uncomfortable. You're probably going to get it wrong. You're going to make mistakes. You're not going to know how to do things well the very first time. And I'm very much type A perfectionist. And so, I did make mistakes, but it was being able to meet other people within the community, being able to learn from them, learning the proper protocols of land acknowledgements and opening prayer blessings, and creating intentional space so that all of our voices are represented and that we can speak to these issues. So that's how my work in environmental justice began, with Rising Hearts, and just really cultivating community, and something that I am truly dedicated to and really believe in terms of what that transformative change will be for our future.
That's awesome. And it, like, so much of what you were saying resonates a lot with me, especially the piece around not having the instinct or necessarily desire or drive to be up front and center, but feeling like you like have to, because it's the moment and the universe is like telling you that this is what you need to do to reach your goals and be in community. It's funny to me that you wanted to do the legislative side of the work, because I grew up in DC, aka Chocolate City, which is on Piscataway land, and that's where I live. I'm currently in Bulbancha, which our interpreters told folks is Choctaw word for land of many languages. And like, I don't want to do policy. I have no interest in policy. It seems like the worst thing in the world. I also, DC statehood is on the front line, like in the headlines right now a lot. I've never voted for senator or Congress person, right? Like, I've never had federal representation. So it just like, I'm like, forget that. That's trash. But yeah, I grew up, I grew up in DC, like one block away in the 90s from buildings that were still burnt out from the 68 riots after Martin Luther King was born. Having lived in DC, you probably know where the Target is, right? In Columbia Heights, that's where I grew up. And different folks I've seen have called Columbia Heights in DC, where I grew up, the most gentrified neighborhood in the country. And like, because of various structural issues, it's still got a good amount of diversity, including class diversity, because of like public housing and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I never considered myself to be an environmentalist, right? Like, I'm a city kid. Honestly, I try to go into nature and it makes me anxious. I'm like, where's my phone? I don't have reception. And I've like only very, very recently, especially in light of, the increase in police violence or visibility around police violence and the movements, have like really understood like deeply the connections between our relationship with the planet and our relationship with just like the ecosystems in which we exist and the police state and violence. And it's like really helped me like drill down into better understanding that everything is so like, all of these issues are so related, right? And I think that different people have different orientations around how they understand the central point of those connections, right? But as long as we're in this place where we're understanding that they all are interconnected, meaning, on Wednesday, Colette Pichon Battle and Valencia Gunder spoke, and our homie Shuo did the intro and just so eloquently put these pieces together, right? We understand that the police exist to protect private property, and then we understand that climate change, the climate crisis, is just an impact multiplier, right? Like a threat multiplier. So everything that we're doing right now is becoming even more high stakes, and it's really refreshing to see folks come into the climate space, which has been so racist and so exclusionary for so long, to build that power that's necessary, because we're not going to get anything. But yeah, I mean, I've been working at Power Shift Network for 5 years now, and honestly, I would only probably say that I've identified as an environmentalist for the past 18 months. And a lot of that's because like, it just didn't feel like it applied to me, right? Like, I don't really like nature. I have really bad allergies. It's like not comfortable for me a lot of the time. But like, even thinking about it, like Earth Day was on Thursday. Earth Day was started by white folks who are seeking to distance themselves from the civil rights movement and try to build a movement, like a social movement separate from like civil rights and black freedom movements. And it is so pervasive everywhere we are, you know, like conservation, John Muir, anti-nativism, right? Like it's all right there.
Yeah.
It's hard to figure out how to, sorry, it's hard to figure out how to even have it, like start a conversation like that, because it's like white supremacy. One of the ways that white supremacy functions is to separate ourselves from the natural world, right? Like we are
Each other.
yeah, right. But like as humans, somehow European like thought established the idea that we are separate, and like our separateness is what makes us special and unique, and that is just like so violent and so damaging, right? Yeah, curious what your experiences have been as a Native person in environmental spaces, and how you've navigated those things.
Yeah, first I would say Earth Day. Um, I think it's problematic in a sense because it romanticizes what's going on or what's not being talked about in our world, and to show your pictures of the beauty of nature and your connection to it. And I took the opportunity to talk about Earth Day on my post to put a reminder in of all the injustices of that needs to be addressed when we talk about Earth Day, that we can't just focus on those Instagram likes and posts and the perfect scenery of what nature looks like and how you connect to it and have a deeper connection and understanding. If you're not taking that deeper connection and understanding and putting it on the front line with other voices and speaking to the injustices as an Indigenous person, as a Black person, as an Asian person, as anybody, a co-conspirator, like if you're not doing that as well, then your post means nothing. Like you're not doing the work and you're not being part of the work in really fighting for Unchi Maka, grandmother Earth, in creating a more sustainable and livable and thriving future for our next generations. And so I liked being able to disrupt Earth Day in that sense of posting my photo of action of back of my days in DC when we were at rallies and protests and doing pop-up protests at Wells Fargo and at Chase Bank to really call and defunding pipelines and calling to an end of police brutality and the violence that's being perpetuated through those mechanisms, through those systems, and through those really rich companies who is committing these acts of violence on people, not just Indigenous people, but those who are taking a stand to protect something that is worth protecting. And so, I'm not a huge fan of Earth Day because it just, I feel like, is totally whitewashes everything in terms of the actual issues that are right there in your backyard or right there in your community, and how it's been impacting you. And so I think as an Indigenous person, I'm really used to us being completely erased from the entire conversation. And when you talked about like inclusivity of being able to, be there and represent, that's something that I always feel like is the most exhausting part of my work, is kind of just always being that squeaky wheel of like, yes, and like, what about Indigenous peoples? Or what about the Black community that you're completely leaving out? Or what about, this other community that's not being included when we talk about, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion training within the outdoor spaces, and with organizations who want to do better and diversify, their company and how they approach the work. And so it's always constantly being that voice of Indigenous peoples exist. We exist after 1900. Sadly, we have like movies and, other things depicting us and controlling the narrative without our input. And so we're always constantly fighting our own erasure and constantly fighting the stereotypes out there against us, and really trying to speak to our own lived experience present day, but also talking about it holistically since 1492, since white settlers, and really trying to be a voice to speak to the true timeline of events, because I always feel like Indigenous the genocide and the boarding schools and all of that, I feel like that has always been left out of the conversation, especially in this last year of what does anti-racism look like? What does building community look like? And people talking about the timeline of events of injustice that began with colonization and white supremacy. And it's not about playing into oppression Olympics. It's not about playing into lateral oppression with our communities, but it's starting with the very beginnings of the foundations of this country, of North America. And that is very centered on the Indigenous and Black Indigenous experience of what is happening. And I always feel like there's not enough voices that connect them,
Yeah.
because they are very much interconnected. We kind of tend to keep it siloed in each other's conversations and compartmentalize it, but we need to braid them together because our histories are very similar. We're experiencing a lot of the same things, but the root cause of everything, like I said, is colonization, it's white supremacy, it's systems of oppression. And so, yeah, it's been really beautiful, though, the last few years of seeing Indigenous representation increase, which is really great. And thank goodness we have Secretary Deb Haaland in the Department of Interior, in an institution, in a department, and that was once tasked with trying to eliminate Native Americans entirely. And now we flipped the script and we have an Indigenous person in there to really speak about what's happening in our communities, to really speak about what land back movement means, or land management in terms of Indigenous stewardship and caretaking. So it's really great to have that voice in that space. And with the new White House Environmental Justice Council that was created, and a wealth of representation there. And luckily we have Sister Jade Begay, Indigenous, on that council and really advocating for Indigenous communities and what's happening on the front lines. So it's been really also beautiful at the same time, because I feel like I am starting to see us becoming more intersectional, and us being able to sit and listen and learn from each other and have these kinds of conversations like we're having now. And I think it's so important for people that are tuning in right now to just be students and listeners, and then take what you've learned and continue that. And that's going to create that ripple effect of change that I hope really is sustaining within this movement, so that we can have a better future.
Yeah, I really love that and appreciate it a lot. When we first talked about having this conversation, one of the things that I really wanted to dig into, you touched on, was over the past few years, we've moved away from talking about people of color to using the language BIPOC, which expressly names Black, Indigenous, and people of color, but pulls out Black and Indigenous in naming our relationship to the settler colonial state that we live in. I have so many thoughts about that. But one thing that I've noticed that's a little bit enraging is that it's always aggregated, right? It's always together. So people will intentionally say BIPOC, but then just clump us all together. And it's actually really funny. I've heard people in Europe say BIPOC, and I'm just like, what are you talking about? What? Yeah, would love to hear your reactions to that cultural shift, and what the effort is behind it, and whatever contributions.
I feel like coming into this space, I appreciated that term, but as I'm really ingrained into the work, I see it as problematic now, because it lumps us all together. And not saying that we're playing into oppression Olympics, that who has it bad, who has it worse, or whatever it is, but we do need to put a lens on all of our communities and be able to give attention and to listen to what has been happening. But also, when we talk about how we can come together, we incorporate each other. But I see it as a problematic word, because it's like one giant umbrella that we're just all lumped together. We all have, the cause of everything is the same, but how we've been impacted by it is so different, and looks very different on a variety of levels. And so you can't speak that our experience is the same exact experience as the Black community, the Asian community, the Jewish community, the Two-Spirit community. It is so different and vast. And so, yeah, I had this conversation with an idol of mine. She's the author of As Long as Grass Grows. Mm-hmm. And, I kind of felt like someone I felt validated because I've been feeling very like nervous to say that I'm not like a supporter of BIPOC, because I don't want, then we have cancel culture, we have call out culture in this, which is very harmful and toxic and can be pretty damaging, especially, you know, to the work that we are so dedicated in doing. I was just like, oh gosh, if I even say this, I'm going to be labeled anti insert whatever. But it's not about that. It's about really being able to give attention and visibility and a platform to all of our communities. And I don't know what that new word can be, a more better word, or as I always say, like, I will always continue to list out everyone in my introductions and how I speak, because everyone's like, oh my gosh, that was so long. Like, don't you get exhausted saying? And I'm just like, no, I will always speak to Indigenous, Black, Brown, Asian, immigrant, Two Spirit, LGBTQ, people with disabilities. And I'm sure I've left out groups, but it's like until we get to a place in our world where we are not having people dying in front of us where we have to record it to get some sort of justice or accountability or lack thereof, or you know, what that even looks like, then we're never gonna have true meaningful justice. I'm going to keep continuing to say all of our communities, because these are the communities I have been grateful to work with and learn from, and really cultivating community that way. But until we get to a place where we're not dying, where we're not being murdered, where we're not being oppressed and harmed, and and not benefiting from the systems that were designed to not benefit us, then, you know, I'm going to keep saying it. And you may get tired of me having to list it out, and it may take up an extra 30 seconds to really speak to it. But until we see true meaningful change happen, like, I'm going to keep doing it. And I don't know what that new word could be, or if there even should be a word created. But yeah, I completely agree with you. It completely says we are all facing the same exact things, we are experiencing the same exact things, and kind of just really invalidates unlived experiences from each other's communities.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, like, when I was talking about it a second ago, there is like an intent behind like naming the lived realities of like the folks who have been here and like oppressed most directly for the longest time under racial capitalism and colonialism. But like no group is a monolith, but like Black folks in America are not a monolith, right? So like it's a hard navigation, right? It's a hard navigation as an African American, how you have these conversations and how you build these spaces. But like there are a lot of like Africans, like people from the continent of Africa. I was born in West Africa by like circumstance, not like my lineage is African American. And just the separations, it's just like the fact that there's not nuance behind this and intentionality in the way that we talk about it is hard, right? And it's also like we're living in a context of a very problematic immigration system, right? So you know, people celebrate Barack Obama and people celebrate Kamala Harris. And I'm like, neither of them are from US slave lineages, right? And like, that's not to say that the US isn't a terrible imperial force and that global financial systems are incredibly abusive and oppressive. I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that folks on the continent, in the islands, don't face oppression, like racial oppression. But what I am saying is that like in folks coming to the US, the ability to come to the US to begin with means that a lot, like I don't know if it's the majority of Black folks who are immigrants are going to have, you know, a different material condition in their lived experience here in the States. And that in turn, like, creates so much conflict and drama and difficulty. And it feels like it completely misses that nuance. It feels like erasure in so many ways. And there's a lot of erasure in movement spaces of African Americans. We have some really great member organizations who are doing work around that at PSN. Generation Green is like obviously one of my favorites, but also like the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. And I'm excited about that, but it's hard and it's complicated and it's messy, and identity is messy.
Yep.
Some language that I've been hearing folks use, especially disabled folks of color, is multiply marginalized people, right? So like people with multiple marginalized identities, which I really appreciate, right? Like those folks are my people. And it like gives me a bigger lens, and it's not just about race, but like everything is about white supremacy and racial capitalism. Every form of oppression is like anchored in kind of like that capitalist framework of like understanding like extracting labor and like hoarding property, right? And that is the problem, and that is like literally the story of our people on this continent, right? Like the history of our people since colonialism.
Exactly. Completely agree.
Yeah. I'm curious what else you would like to talk about, Jordan.
I think, especially within these movement spaces, and like we just need to really incorporate, the history. We can't treat it as cafeteria food of picking and choosing what we want to address and what we are going to ignorantly ignore. We have, school systems to blame for this, for completely whitewashing our histories and or either romanticizing situations that, are lies. And also within the environmental space, a lot of greenwashing, and it's not as easy as just decreasing your carbon footprint or recycling and composting. Like that is the very like bare minimum of what environmental justice is and how we can really take action. Like you have to peel back all of the layers, and environmental justice includes racial injustice and just the oppression of so many communities that have been impacted by this. And we need to have those discussions and incorporate them into everything. And I feel like that's something that has been happening a lot more in this last year and a half. Something that has been really difficult to try and convey, because a lot of people, I feel like a lot of non folks of color don't want to recognize, their ancestral potential contributions to perpetuating this ongoing systemic violence and injustice. And, I'm always having to say, like, ask yourself why you're having this reaction. Like, clearly it's making you uncomfortable, but this is the actual facts of history. When you are actually listening to Indigenous Black folks speaking to this history right in front of you, and you having these reactions are invalidating our own experiences and the traumas that has been generationally passed down. But we need to start incorporating this into curriculum. We need to start having these discussions in a much bigger holistic lens. We can't have it narrowly focused on just like one small issue or one small contribution that's going to make a big impact when it's not. We have to address it systemically. But yeah, I feel like there's just so much to talk about, so many different kinds of conversations that we could have, but I think we need to start with the foundations of this country, and people need to not be triggered when they hear the words white supremacy and colonization. Like that is literally what happened to all over around the world, and how so many communities have been impacted and are still feeling the impacts today, just as we are here in North America on Turtle Island. And we need to recognize that. We need to really talk about, all of the displacement that has happened, bodies being stolen from their homelands and enslaved and transported elsewhere without their own consent, and the forced removal of Indigenous peoples, and just the assimilation tactics of incorporating us into society, and how that has played out, which has created this white supremacist hierarchical tyranny of, who is more superior, who is more dominant, and making us all think that we are the lesser than, and we're not. And we need to start having those conversations, because those are the impacts that we are facing today. Those are the things that we are feeling in our communities today in this very moment.
There's so many layers to it too, right? Because like all of the time we are growing as a country, right? Like multiculturalism, folks across the globe are coming in, and it, like, especially folks who are not white, right, will take space in ways that they deserve, right? I'm not having issues with that, but I have a really hard time sometimes with folks of color who aren't white trying to like explain why I am really focused on centering Blackness in the network right now. Because if you don't center Blackness and you don't center Native folks, we're not going to have a seat at the table. You know, like there's a lot of antagonism from folks who are like, you know, one or two generations in the States who don't have that context. And also, right, we're talking about folks, a lot of folks who are like African descendant, are like indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, who have these conversations. We were talking about BIPOC, right? I've seen such ridiculous things, and I think it's white folks who are writing it, but like I've seen people writing now about Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and people of color, and I'm just like, if you, what? Like Latinx is not, like, that's not a racial identity, right? Like there are full-blooded German people all over Argentina that, like, if you're trying to get a seat at the table because it's the cool kids club, I don't understand it. It's a lot. It's a lot to try to parse out.
Yeah. And I think one thing too we have to be more mindful of, and sadly I've faced this, is now we are in a time of momentum. Everything is at the forefront. Everything wrong with this country is clearly visible, and we still have those people who don't want to face it. We do have to go about all of this work in a very respectful and mindful way, while never oppressing another person, communities of color's experience.
Right.
But how do we do that carefully? Because I had, for example, I was in an anti-racism training, and the trainer, is Black, and I heard a lot of great things, and I was like, great, this is going to be so awesome. And initially like started right in on anti-Blackness. I was like, oh, that's so good. Like, I need to learn more about this, because we have a lot of anti-Blackness within our Indigenous communities that needs to be addressed, and a long history there, especially in the Oklahoma area. And so I was like really excited. And then he led with saying colonialism didn't exist until the arrival of the first slave ships. And I'm just like, you completely erased over 150 years of Indigenous enslavement, of genocide, of wars, of bounties placed on our heads. Redskins, that's where that name comes from, is what the former Washington football team was named. Like, there was a lot of issues that came from that one sentence he stated, and I was that squeaky wheel and the only one that spoke up. And I was just like, hey, you completely, erased my people's, community and experience. And then he continued to say that, he doesn't know a single Indigenous person that would say colonialism has impacted their way of life. But then this is the tricky part. He then states that he's Cherokee. And that's totally, I can't ever discredit that, because we had a lot of interracial marriages that happened, especially in the Oklahoma region. And sadly, there's a history of enslavement from Indigenous folks and Black folks. And that's just another big issue in and of itself. But I'm just like, okay, one, I've heard this a lot. We're very used to people always claiming this identity. It's always Cherokee or it's always Blackfeet. But in the sense, because I know this history now and I've read a couple books speaking about this, I was like, I can't discredit him on that.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to let him have that. But I kept asking him the questions like, are you involved in Indigenous movement spaces?
Right.
Like, have you worked with other Indigenous voices to speak to this and for you to feel correct in your statement? And he couldn't say anything. And I kept saying, I was like, you're completely excluding other people from other oppressed communities, marginalized communities. And, I'm totally with you on being able to take that time and center in on our own communities, because we should occupy that space to really speak to it. But when you're using erasure language to only center your own community and excluding others that have been impacted in the same way but differently, that's really harmful and really dangerous. But it's like, how do we have these conversations to be able to sit and listen and to let them speak their truth, to let them speak to these issues, but not erasing and excluding other communities in a really harmful way. And that's sadly not the first instance I've seen this happen in all of these anti-racism trainings, which I have never seen anyone do except unless it's a white person or a Black person. And I have never seen anyone else coming from our other communities who have been impacted being able to speak and teach. And that's something that I would like to see change, because those are going to be the only perspectives we
Right.
see when we talk about how do we address these issues.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to work together and do these trainings together, or center other voices to have an opportunity to speak, maybe at a different training, or if it's an all-day workshop, having their own workshop, or whatever that may look like. But it's really like, how do we have these conversations without being called out or canceled out or being labeled anti whatever? And it's not about that. It's, I just care so much about making sure people can have a seat at the table, and that our experiences aren't being erased from the conversation when we talk about colonialism, when we talk about capitalism and the impacts that we have all been experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there's a lot there, but I really would love to ask you about, like, I've on TikTok, I've seen I like have gotten the algorithm. The algorithm's like, show Dany natives, like lots of political things. And I'm like, great. I always try to be really conscientious about the media that I consume, right? And I've heard a lot of conversations about re-indigenizing, right? So like thinking about folks who have through like all of these terrible systems lost connections to their ancestral identities. I'm like, I actually don't know very much about it. Do you? What do you have to offer in terms of context?
I think we are in a time where we are trying to reclaim who we are. And that's leading us down these pathways of finding out our history and where we come from and our roots. And this is what creates a lot of tension, I feel like, within Indigenous communities, is like, blood quantum when we talk about that, or being an enrolled member. Because if you're enrolled, you're definitely for sure Native. But then we also have descendants. We have people who are put into adoption agencies or stolen from their homes. You have the boarding schools. You have people that were so violently removed from their communities and ways of life, and then they went out into the urban communities, or they were adopted by a white family or just a non-Indigenous family, and that has lost that connection to their roots, to where they came from, the lands they came from, those teachings and knowledge. And I think now when we start seeing the words re-indigenizing, I think for me, as I see it, that's a concept that, and a way of life that so many of us can embody, because luckily we're in a time now, as we're fighting for what environmental justice looks like, we're looking to Indigenous knowledge keepers of what are the practices and the traditional ways of how we can be connecting and caretaking of these lands, and how we connect to each other as people, and how we can protect each other and the earth at the same time. And what does that look like? And thankfully, we are seeing an increasing representation of Indigenous knowledge keepers and voices that could speak to that, since 5% of Indigenous peoples make up the world population, but yet we are the caretakers of up to 86% of the world's biodiversity. So clearly we're doing something. But I think that's something that we can all embody, is, decolonizing as best we can from all of these capitalistic infrastructures and systems and pathways that we have been born into, and we kind of don't really know any better or how to disconnect from that, and truly reconnecting back with ourselves internally, reconnecting back with the lands, and looking at it, like I said, like I always say, is like looking at it in a much bigger holistic way of how can we protect the lands, how can we protect ourselves, how can we protect our communities. And so, yeah, I find a lot of people using that word re-indigenize, especially from Indigenous folks who aren't enrolled members, or who may be more white passing.
Yeah.
That's just something that's their journey and their way to reconnect and find who they are. And feeling that sense of connection, but maybe not having a way to identify that as, and that's just them on their own journey trying to do that. Or indigenizing spaces. Like I hear that word a lot of like, how can we indigenize this platform or this space? And how can we reclaim or occupy these spaces and take them back in a sense? And I think that is also something that is not just Indigenous, we can incorporate that with everyone and have everyone be part of indigenizing these processes.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. And it makes me like, I have lots of feelings about the word Indigenous. And this is like a vulnerable moment, Jordan, I'm gonna be honest, right? So like I feel, well, there are lots of African Americans who identify as Indigenous to this country because it is the place that we are from. You know, we don't have, it's where our culture was born out of, all of this. And that's a thing, like that exists. I have mixed feelings about the word Indigenous, so I'm not particularly invested in that. But oh, my ring light just fell. At the same time, like I also feel like Indigenous is anti-Black, right? Like it feels like the way that people conceive of Indigeneity is anti-Black. Like I've never heard anyone who was not a Black person refer to Africans as Indigenous. You know what I mean? Like people on the continent of Africa.
Yeah.
And I'm curious when you use the word, like what you mean, like when you're saying that Indigenous people make up 5% of the world's population and are like supporting all of the ecosystems, what, like who those people are, what that means, and how you like use that word and what it means to you.
Yeah, I always reflect on Acacia Red Elk, who is a teacher with my program, Indigenous Wellness Through Movement. And this is something that, you know, when I speak to Indigenous, I'm speaking to Indigenous of North America. That's how like I identify, but I'll always introduce myself as Lakota because that's who I am and that's where I come from. But when I talk about the much larger perspective of Indigenous, I use that as the bigger word to use, the bigger lens to look through it. But Acacia, you know, a lot of people come into that space for her teaching and her classes and feel, because the program is supposed to be more accessible and it's supposed to be welcome for everybody, but it's an opportunity to center Indigenous, Black, Asian, you know, people who look like us. That's the platform I want to give them, is that we can practice self-care and wellness. But one of her teachings is saying that, you know, we all have Indigenous roots and we all need to look into our ancestral roots, the ancestral memories that are there, and connecting that way. And you may look white, but you do have Indigenous roots. And that's something that I also like to speak to as well, is like when we talk about Black folks being here, African Americans, like that's something I really like speaking to, is the fact that, you know, they were born here, they're Indigenous here, but they also have ancestral roots, connecting them back to their own Indigenous communities and tribes or villages, you know, in Africa, on that continent specifically. And we also have them in the islands, you know, we have them in Australia, we have them, you know, in Asia, we have them everywhere. And so I think when we talk about the 5% of the world's population, like that's who it's incorporating. It's those who, you know, have been living within our communities, living in very traditional ways of knowledge and practices, and the caretaking that comes through it, not only as communal, but with our earth. Yeah. And I think all of that credit to how we take care of the world's biodiversity and our outlook on it and what that looks like comes from those teachings and comes from those communities. And so it's a much bigger lens of how I look at Indigenous. But yeah, I can see how it's problematic and can be exclusive. But yeah, I think we should have a discussion on that alone and another topic.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Like wrapping my brain around that. It's going to be a minute, but yeah. And there's just like, there's so much wisdom from folks who are able to like live in those traditional ways, right? In terms of like existing with the earth and like sustainably, you know, folks have been living for a really long time without creating a climate crisis. Yeah, like a really, really long time. People did a lot of great living without.
And we still have communities that have been untouched by colonialism, that are still living a very traditional way and are at risk of being displaced and being removed entirely because of deforestation and other infrastructure projects. But it is possible. It is still there and living. And I think, especially for those that have been impacted by colonialism, definitely that's what we're trying to get back to, is being able to live that way, even in a modern colonial society. But it's how can we do it to our benefit to truly benefit the people and the planet at the same time?
Yeah. And that makes me think, like, earlier this year, I might have learned this on TikTok also, to be honest. I checked it out. I'm not giving false information. But after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, Black folks like were trying to live off of the land, right? Like foraging and like, you know, claiming land and trying to farm it.
Yeah.
But like that like the fact that Black folks were trying to live off of the land in sustainable ways was like the birth of the modern like policing system, right? Because like that's when people were drilling down on like private property laws and like preventing the Black folks from being able to build their own like lives, like build their own careers, because they had access to free or low cost foods, so that former slaves would be dependent on white landowners for their subsistence, right? So like it's interesting to think about the ways that like the police state exists to prevent us structurally from being able to build that kind of sustainability and oneness with the planet, just by design, like fundamentally by design. That's how it exists, right? And there's this social theory that people are starting to talk about called abolition ecology that really makes that connection, right? Like we can't, like there's no way for us to heal our relationships with the planet without really diving into the role that the state plays in our oppression and the way that it exists to protect capital, and like those steps and how they're connected. Folks, I really want to help folks understand that like we cannot stop the climate crisis unless we get rid of prisons. And that also really important to me is like the praxis of it, right? So we were talking about healing and grounding in the session title. Abolition is getting rid of prisons, right? And the police state. But abolition is also about being able to tell somebody that you hurt their feelings or they hurt your feelings, right? Like we need to be able to build relationships and trust, and also just social skills, right? Like social skills to be able to move through conflict in ways that are productive, right? That help us heal. And I can be really conflict averse. Like I can be real conflict averse, but like understanding that there's that level of cultural work that we need to be doing in terms of like trying to move past and unlearn these systems that white supremacy has brought into our lives, is important.
Yeah, and it's not an easy fix. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of own self-reflection. Even as an Indigenous person, a Black person, we have that ingrained within ourselves too.
Yeah.
That we were forced into that. We were forced to play the system at the same time. And so it's going to take a lot of work. And I think having this opportunity, this 10-day event, the convergence, like what y'all are doing, Power Shift Network, is truly the things we need in this world to be having these conversations, to be able to reflect, to be able to learn, to be able to center in on these lived experiences and to talk about these really uncomfortable issues that needs to be discussed. And hopefully that, as I'll say before, the ripple effect, it'll lead us to having a conversation with our family, within ourselves, within our community, and will hopefully bring in more co-conspirators. As I'm learning too, I don't like the word allies, because that has become so performative. That has become, very just like a trigger word that gets used within the movement spaces. But I have learned from Faith Briggs. I got to be on her podcast, and really am learning so much from her. Is co-conspirator. is a much better term if we really truly want to come together as communities, as all communities, literally doing this work to dismantle and to eliminate these institutional barriers and to address these issues, and really being in it with each other and being there to lift each other up and never oppress or suppress each other at the same time. Really creating these intentional spaces to build a better future and cultivate a better community.
In my brain, I was like, oh, we're just going to take that recording and I'm going to send it to funders. That's what just happened in my brain, to be completely honest. And I'm not going to say that's not going to happen. But yeah, I feel like that's a really wonderful thing. Thank you. That means a lot to me.
I see you. I have learned from Power Shift. It's what y'all are doing is absolutely incredible. And I know it's a lot of work. I'm sure you don't have the full staff that you would like to be able to do all this, but the fact that you are all doing it is just the work that we need to see. And I like to call it the heart work. I don't ever like to call it the hard work.
Yeah.
It is the heart work that keeps us going and what centers ourselves and within ourselves in the movement and everything and how we interact with each other. So really appreciate you, Dany, and what you're doing, and you're doing incredible work. And so just keep it up. You got me. You probably have all these people that have attended that are behind you. We will support you and support the work of Power Shift Network.
Thank you. I feel like now would be a really great time to just like open the floor to anybody who might want to ask a question. I can like invite you to come off mute if you want. Just send me a chat, let me know. But yeah, our team is so great. I was talking, I don't know, there was some kind of moment of like, who would you get rid of if you like had to get rid of someone on staff? And I was like, well, not that person, not that person, not that person. Oh my God, not that person. And then it was everybody.
Yeah.
Because everybody is so fantastic on our team, right? Like so smart, people bring me so much wisdom and insight and like patience and grace. It's so good. It's so good.
Being able to create a space that allows the conversation to continue is the best way to go. And I'm all about words, and I like using the word appreciate. Like I don't like saying thank you as much, but I like using appreciate with the person and saying their name, because that makes a difference. And it's also letting you know that like you're valued and what you are doing is so important. And I am appreciative of you and the work Power Shift Network is doing. And also when we talk about these trainings and coming from our own perspectives that we want to speak to, which we have every right to occupy that space and be a voice, we can continue the conversation with and, never but. Because when you use the word but, you are asserting that your opinion and your voice supersedes anything else. And so that's like my biggest recommendation when I am doing these trainings is like always create that space to continue the conversation with and allowing that to continue with the next person that can speak to their lived experience and to share their teachings, and then continue that with the next person. And that's how we can cultivate community and meaningful change.
Yeah, for sure. Mikhail has a question. So Mikhail, you should be able to come off mute on video, whatever you want.
Thanks, y'all. This was so great, and like I have a lot of thoughts running through my mind, and I think the one that's like really jumping out at me, just because it's something that I've been reflecting on too, Dany, is like, being someone who's like mixed race, have Black ancestry from the Caribbean, and coming to the US, like there's been this different like privilege that I haven't like recalled until I got to the US, which is like in the Caribbean, we have our whole countries that we can like, have some, it's just so much more power and influence to change how things happen, and like how like the government isn't working against people as much because they are the people too. Like their families are the Black folks and the Indian folks and the Native folks. And so yeah, just like wondering how can have you been reflecting on like how Black people can find home in the US in a way that other Black folks from the diaspora have, or is there something else that you've been thinking about? I don't know. That's a huge question, but
It is a really huge question, but Mikhail, like honestly, for me, that's a lot of what DC has been, like very specifically. And it's like gentrification is terrible, right? But like, you know, DC's never had a like, I mean, DC only got their first mayor in like 1973 because DC is colony in a lot of ways. But DC, like the local government was founded by SNCC alumni. Like if you know DC, I mean, you probably a lot of people know who Marion Barry is. He was the mayor for life, who was an incredibly troubled human, but also, you know, made a lot of really important shifts in our city's culture and identity. Like every kid can get a summer job. Like every teenager over 14 can get a summer job paying like a $14 an hour minimum wage. Like by default, like you don't like you just need to ask and you can get it. There are just like a lot of really, really great policies in DC. DC's got like really fantastic public assistance and like it's because the government centered us, right? Like, and it exists in the same way in terms of like we have a voice and we have power on this like smaller micro level and it's like at risk. And also we don't have autonomy, right? Like the federal government can like say no to whatever. It's the reason why DC doesn't have like a recreational marijuana retail was because DC voted it in. Like it was like 70% in favor of this initiative. And Congress was like, JK, LOL, we're not going to approve your budget. We don't like marijuana. So like it's funny to even think about it because like DC for me has been that place of oh I belong here, like I listen to the music, like there's nothing that makes me happier or feel safer than when I'm just like sitting in my house and there's a cookout happening on the corner and they're playing go-go. And so like I'm able to access that in some ways through like this like very specific community that I live in, but I don't know, we just need to secede. Maybe we take over a state. What state we going to, Mikhail? You want to come? It's complicated. It's complicated and like frustrating that I feel like I can't have conversations about like being African American, right? Like I have a lot of friends who are like first, second, third generation immigrants who like go visit their family and they talk about how it's healing for them and how like you need to leave the States because it's a crazy capitalist terrible world. And it's just like no, but you're so lucky to have a place that feels like home and like you can see people who look like you and like just relax. Like I don't get to relax. Is what it feels like sometimes, you know. It's tiring. Anyway, that's great. Oh yeah. Oh, it does.
I think it's also important too is like I'm learning is like the concept of like Columbus arrived to the States. It's like no, it's like there's a history of genocide and erasure and violence happening to our island relatives and like that's what we need to begin with as well. And like having that inclusion of the communities that have been, you know, really harmed and really erased. And that's something that like I've been learning more about because my sister Bestie, like her ancestral roots on her mother's side is from Trinidad and Tobago. And like that's kind of like what sparked this like whole conversation and interest in like, okay, it's like this didn't exist just within the confines and the colonial borders of what is North America, of the United States and Mexico and Canada. Like you need to peel it back by the layers and like look elsewhere where this has been impacted and the truth of colonization of North America and everything. I think that's also other conversations that need to happen as well, and like centering Indigenous folks coming from those islands, being able to speak to this and to be able to be part of those conversations as well. It has devastatingly impacted the communities there too.
So much. There's so much there too, because it's also like there's so many forms of colonization that the US undertakes, like theoretically in our name, right? Thinking about the like 800 something military bases across the planet and just like all of the control that happens. And then like seeing and having an analysis and understanding of the harms that colonialism has created, like it fucks me up, honestly. Like really, like just like understanding that the military system and all of these things are like enacting the same violence over and over and over again abroad in our name, and that, you know, depending on where in the world you go, you might you get seen as American first, in a very, very strange and uncomfortable way, like understanding America as like a white supremacist system that tried to kill us.
Yeah.
More questions, friends? We got some time. I can't not make faces. It's like kind of a problem. We can keep talking. Yeah, I'm curious, Jordan, like thinking about PSN as an organization that centers young folks, like specifically what kind of like advice do you have for young activists in like figuring out their lives?
Yeah, I guess my message would be really make time and prioritize your own self-care within these movements. It is hard work and it's going to be long hours, and I feel like I don't know anyone within these movements that's not wearing multiple hats, and it's something that we are constantly always doing and constantly trying to find pathways to be part of these conversations and platforms and spaces to really give visibility to what we're advocating for, but really prioritize self-care and you know, being able to take care of yourself, because this is sometimes re-triggering and traumatizing, and you kind of being re-victimized by the system, having to speak to these issues constantly all day, every day. And so I would definitely recommend prioritizing self-care and really being collaborative, you know, outside of your own community, because I feel like when we start in these movement spaces, we tend to just stay within our own community, which is totally fine. And that's how like I began. But when I started learning more and allowing myself to like sign up for these webinars hosted by someone else, a completely different community that's speaking about a topic that we continuously talk about in our own community, that's how we're going to build intersectionality, and that's how we're going to build an understanding and being able to work together. And so integrating that into, you know, how you go about your day and your practice, and being open to all of that, I think is really great. And yeah, prioritizing self-care.
For sure. Katya, you should be able to come off mute and on video.
1 second.
Yeah.
Little thing covering my camera. Here you go. Hi, everybody. Super grateful for this discussion. A lot's going on in my head, so I might not be very eloquent right now. But what I'm thinking is English dominance and like language oppression, because I am an immigrant on Turtle Island, but I also consider myself Indigenous because I'm coming from Northern Russia, like very, very far east Northern Russia. And it's hard for me to hear that, like Dany, you saying that you're struggling with Indigenous, because I do so as well. I live in so-called Canada right now, and I am obviously not saying that I'm Indigenous, but also there's not another word to describe like who am I. So there's a lot of soul searching in that, and I just blame English for all of that. And I don't know, it's just a reflection. I don't know if it's a question, but something what's been liberating for me is learning my native language, which is so inaccessible because some little people actually speak that. And I have been living here for 7 years now, and I haven't been surrounded by people who speak my language. So it's been really hard to find someone who will teach me, because I'm definitely losing it. But it's not like learning English, like you go on, I don't know, those apps or YouTube, like it's not there, and it's just so unfair, but it is possible. And I guess what I just wanted to share, that English is harmful in so many ways. At the same time, it's so great that like all of us coming from some different background can actually understand each other. So I don't know if there's a question there, but just wanted to share and feeling lots of emotions out of your sharing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I completely hear you on that. And I wish there was a better term or a concept that really embodies that and not so much like isolates everyone's idea of what Indigenous is, just being Indigenous peoples to Turtle Island. Like it's so much bigger than that. And those are roots and our connections and our history and our lived experience that extend beyond that. But yeah, I completely agree with you. English language is very harmful and very exclusive, and totally benefits colonialism. I see it, I think in a lot of ways.
Yeah, totally. Sorry. Life, travel life. It's been a busy week. No, I really appreciate that insight, Katya. It's hard. Like, and the thing about language is that it limits your way of like conceptualizing things also, right? So like hearing you say this like is going to be more for my brain to like noodle on for a while. Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? Come join us, hang out. Indigeneity. It's also like I've been having conversations with one of my friends a lot lately about capitalism and white supremacy and the way that they function, and she's Arab. And you know, she talks a lot about like various empires that have existed like thousands of years ago, right? And thinking about like where are the lines and like how, like if people have been moving around for thousands of years, like the relationship to our lands is really fascinating, right? Like, yes, there are places that are people's ancestral homes, but like we all belong to this planet. Like that's the one constant that anybody can claim. And I think that that's like the takeaway, right? Like hopefully that's the takeaway. And also we need to like give folks space to share with one another and build culture and figure out how to get rid of capitalism. I just want there to be a lot of work around co-ops. That's my dream right now. Like we can do that, right? It's a step. It's a step for sure.
I think it's definitely possible, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you what you hope folks take away from this conversation.
Yeah, I hope y'all can let this simmer and stew. And also, you know, I'm putting it out there. I have a website, jordanmarie.daniel.com, and then risinghearts.org. I always try and make myself approachable as possible and take the time to read all the requests on Instagram, because I really am about engaging in dialogue and conversation as long as it's respectful and mindful of each other's energy. And so don't ever hesitate to reach out for any questions or connections. I love serving in the networking role, being able to connect people with other incredible, awesome people. But I really hope what you take away is, you know, this is going to be a long road. It's not just a Band-Aid or an easy fix in how we address these systemic issues and injustices. And I really hope after today's conversation in 10 days, if you're a part of it all, being a co-conspirator and being with us and being motivated and taking those first proactive steps in being in this movement and this work with us, because we need more. And maybe that can help alleviate some of, you know, the stress and how many hats we're taking on and all of that, so that we can prioritize self-care within our own day and feeling like we have community that is in this with us, whether you're Black, Indigenous, Muslim, Asian, whoever you are, that you are truly in this work with us. And I just hope you're inspired. I hope that you're ready to go beyond just a follow or a like or clickbait or donating. I hope this inspires you to Google your local advocate groups on the issues that you care so passionately about and reaching out to them, asking them, how can I show up? What's needed? Where can I fit in and support the work you're doing and not reinventing the wheel, not Columbusing or not, mansplaining or coming there to invalidate these experiences, but being there to support and to figure out how you can be part of this community with us. And so hope to see you out there on those front lines and in these virtual spaces or in-person spaces, and really being able to start recognizing each other and being able to be there for each other. So I hope this leaves you inspired.
That sounds great. I think there's one question here from Carol. Can you speak about how spiritual poverty might translate into our treatment of the earth and each other?
That's a good question.
I mean, I think it's all the same.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I think like the lesson, right, is that like we are the planet. Like we are Earth, right? Like we are natural beings. There's no actual separation between the planet and ourselves and our bodies. Our bodies are natural. Our bodies are the environment that we live in. Hat tip to Generation Green for helping me understand that. And so like that's the thing, right? Like it's all broken because we aren't in alignment.
Yeah. And I think we have to blame colonialism for that, as separating us, as seeing that concept and outlook and embodiment of we are the earth and we are not above each other and we are not below each other. It's these systems that were created and perpetuated that has made it that way, that we are the same as our four-leggeds, as our winged, as our two-leggeds, like, our underwater relatives. Like we are, like I said at the very beginning, Mitakuye Yasin, that is that embodiment of we are all related. And that's how I end every prayer. That's how we end our ceremonies, like with this phrase and saying and teaching. And that's the way I try to live my life, is that we are all related. And when I fight for my community, I'm fighting for your community. I have a lot to learn, but I am fighting for yours as well. And fighting for those that aren't represented or don't have a voice, to be able to speak for them and include them in this fight.
Yeah. That is fantastic. I have to go let people in to this room. It'll be right.
Let's see. There's another question here. What action do you think should be prioritized in this moment by co-conspirators? I would say, there's a question in the chat. What action should be prioritized in this moment by co-conspirators?
I think that the question about prioritization is like what makes that hard.
Yeah.
I think that people need to move with what speaks to them, right? And like not intellectualize things so much, right? Yeah. Like I think that it's really, really important. Like part of my theory of change is that anytime that there's any kind of like movement moment, that we all show up. Like it doesn't matter what it is. If people are mobilizing around reproductive rights, if people are mobilizing around the PRO Act and labor, like it doesn't matter what it is. It's essential that as people in the movement, that we show up for anything that is like in our alignment with our progressive, like human-centered and earth-centered values. So like that, like look at where we are, like understand the moment, but do what speaks to you. Like do what makes sense to you, like go with your gut. Because if you love people and the planet, you're not going to go wrong necessarily. Like try to do as best as you can, but we need people everywhere. For sure. For sure, for sure. All right, Jordan, I think we might call it a day. This has been so dope.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you for having me.
Yeah, it's been fun. We'll talk lots more. Sorry, everyone on the call. You're probably gonna miss out. But very excited to keep building with you. I appreciate you and your support. It means a lot.
Thank you, and appreciate all of you for tuning in and showing up.
Yeah, have a really great afternoon. There's going to be another session for the Convergence. Homies at Bulbansha Collective are going to be talking about land acknowledgements.
Nice.
So that should be really dope. I'm really excited about it. And we'll be in touch.
Yep.
Be well, y'all. Bye.